Hello, my name is Josh Wachtel, and I'm the communications director for Building a New Reality. And folks are just starting to stream in on the webinar. I see there's still folks in the waiting room coming in, but we're happy to get started right at noon Eastern Time for our webinar today, which is titled Political Depolarization Preventing Family Feuds. And this is the second in our spring series at Banner. This is the True Representation series. So for today, we're going to be focusing quite a bit on a region, although I think that this topic's going to be relevant to folks across the United States, and also I know we often have guests from around the world. So welcome to you all. Um, I would ask just to get things started if you want to find the chat box and select, there's a blue box that says send chat to, and I hope you'll choose everyone because otherwise it'll just be, excuse me, the hosts and the panelists who will see it. But if you want to chat to everyone, where you're coming in from, and also, yeah, well, where you're coming in from is great. And if you have anything to say about this, your interest in this topic, that would be welcome too. Um, Thank you. I I don't know why chat is always disabled at the beginning. Forgive me. Let me do that and that. There you go. So the chat should be all set. Thanks for letting me know. Um, okay. You guys are on the ball. All right. So again, this is the True Representation series that we're presenting. Our last event in April, we were looking at citizens' assemblies and lotocracy, choosing folks by lottery to govern. And we have been talking about these kinds of processes a lot. We consider all these large group decision-making processes sort of an extension of where we've been coming from in restorative practices, where we're engaging one-on-one in small groups, in larger group processes, whether it's to resolve conflict or to make plans or to figure out how a community or a workplace or a school or a family can function better. Today, we're looking at a different aspect of that whole question, which is this branch of work that we're seeing emerge around depolarization. And the group that we're featuring is Braver Angels, based in the United States, which has been using different formats for bringing people together to have conversations about difficult topics. And in some cases, although not all, they're using a format of red leaning for more Republican or conservative leaning folks, and blue leaning for more progressive or Democratic leaning folks. And so our guests today represent both sides, and we have a family angle. We have a woman named Heather Blakesley from Philadelphia, who has been organizing for Braver Angels, and her father, Jerry Blakesley, and they'll be coming on later. And then from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is just north in the Philadelphia suburbs, we have Lee Rush and his brother, Brooke Rush. And Lee has organized an event which you'll be hearing about. And so we're going to be looking at that as a crucial component that we think is important, that people have to realize that they can talk to each other, that they can get along, even if they have a diversity of political opinions. And that's sort of a prelude for these larger group decision-making processes that we've also been highlighting. All right, I see we've got a lot of folks weighing in from Pennsylvania, Allentown, Cyprus, all right, Norwalk, Connecticut, Cambridge, Mass, Gloucestershire, UK, Columbia, all right, Dublin, Ireland, wow, Staffordshire, UK, Rochester, New York, and the list goes on. Netherlands, Curacao, Rochester, New York. So wonderful. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us from all around. And at this point, I'd like to bring on Ted Wachtell, the founder of Building a New Reality, to give an overview of the topic before we bring on our other guests.
Hi, thanks for coming. Just wanted to briefly introduce today just by saying how I've experienced Braver Angels most significantly. A week after the US presidential election, I found myself participating in a Braver Angels Red Blue workshop, they call that event, at a church in Philadelphia, and it's offered in many places around the US. My wife Susan and I had registered to attend this depolarizing event only as observers, but when a vacancy occurred, I volunteered to be one of 8 blue-leaning participants who were matched with 8 red-leaning participants. And according to the Brave Angels website, they're the nation's leading, largest cross-participation volunteer-led movement to bridge the partisan divide for the good of our democratic republic. And the workshop goals, I'll just read them so I can be precise. The 3 workshop goals were for participants to learn about the experiences, feelings, and beliefs of those on the other side, to discover areas of commonality in addition to differences, and 3, to gain insights that might be helpful to others in helping to depolarize our community and the nation. So it was a 4-hour event. It included I think, a very well-designed stereotype exercise in which each of the subgroups discussed and reported back to the whole group on the most common false stereotypes or misconceptions about their side, why these stereotypes are inaccurate, what is true instead, and whether there is a kernel of truth in the stereotype. Um, Later, in a fishbowl listening exercise, everyone sat in a larger circle as each of the 2 sides, one at a time, talked about why do you think your side's values and policies are good for the country, but what reservations do you have about your side? And this was organized by Heather, and she'll talk about she and her dad's motivations and all of that. Jerry was in one of the red leaning folks in the event with me. And really the thing that struck me the most was my wife Susan, who a week after the election was deeply concerned about the partisan nastiness. And she told me on the way home that she felt relieved, that she no longer felt scared because she felt she understood where folks on the other side were coming from. And it's really not about agree. We can agree to disagree. My friend Terry O'Connell, an ex-cop in Australia and one of the best facilitators, conflict resolvers that I know, said actually people need most to be heard and understood, and they're much less concerned about being right or wrong. So tonight, I think, will be something of a testament to that. Thanks.
All right. All right. Thank you, Ted. So at this point, I'm going to ask you to stay on the screen and I'm going to invite Heather Blakesley and Jerry Blakesley to turn your videos on and unmute. All right. Wonderful. All right. So we've got 2 guests. Heather Blakesley, as I mentioned, is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Jerry is her father from oh no, his screen went black again. All right, well we'll deal with that as it goes. Is from Easton, Pennsylvania, although he mentioned that he's actually doing some work in Connecticut today. Anyway, Heather, I'm going to turn it over to you just to share a little bit about, your Braver Angels experience and specifically the event that you organized that my father referenced.
Sure. There are probably a couple different component parts that are important to cover here. I think one resonates with what Ted said about, um, people in the country needing to come together for the sake of the future of the country. We do have to decide what we want to build together, and we can't do that unless we're talking, right? So, I decided to do an event called Founders Weekend. It was a larger weekend of events, specifically after the election, to kind of prove to people that we could have conversations with people that we disagreed with as long as they were structured properly and if people were coming to the conversations in good faith. And as we put events together, as a longtime volunteer for Braver Angels, I served as the Blue co-coordinator for the state of Pennsylvania for about 2 years. And I had taken a red and blue workshop during that time with other Pennsylvanians and also found it really transformative. And I wanted to offer that experience to other people because I think out of all of the things that Braver Angels does, and it does a lot of really great work all around the country on this topic, none of it really matters at the end of the day if actual Americans are not figuring this out in the spaces and communities that they live in. And so we worked with the Southeast Pennsylvania Alliance here in Pennsylvania to deploy a red blue workshop. And as Ted was saying, the program design is really, really important. There have to be an equal number of people who self-identify as, leaning red or leaning blue. And that's in part because you don't want anybody to be on the defensive from the beginning, feeling like they're being, overwhelmed by the other side. The participants also agree to come to those conversations in good faith. And what I mean by that is to discover, to learn, to understand, and not to convince. That's a really, really important part of the workshop. As Ted was just saying, they want you to learn about other people's experiences to understand why they believe what they believe. They also want you to understand where there might be areas of commonality. And a lot of people walk away from it with a much better understanding of how to participate in the next conversation because this is intended to be the next conversation. It's always intended to have the next conversation. So part of why I started doing work with Braver Angels and why I founded Root Quarterly, which is the magazine that I produce, is because around 2014, 15 or so, something like that, it became really apparent that online conversations were devolving into just kind of chaos. Fake news was, beginning to kind of be rampant all over the internet. So people were not working with the same, facts half of the time. And it really started to impact my relationship with my dad. And we are we are a kind of English and German family. It's a keep calm and carry on household. We are not known for our slammed doors and screaming matches and those kinds of things. But that was exactly the kind of interaction that was happening, after the 2016 election in particular. And it got really, really bad. It was mostly my dad and I who were going at it. I have two siblings and a mother who kind of also stayed out of the fray, but my dad and I were going at it pretty hard. And it was really impacting our relationship. And at some point, I wrote him an email and just said, it was a lot of things, but look, I'm not coming home anymore if we can't figure this out. Like, we have to be able to relate to each other in a different way than we have been in the past couple months or year or what have you. And part of that was identifying, and this I think speaks to why Braver Angels resonates so hard, is that we were using each other as avatars of the other side in a very stereotyped kind of way. And when you do that, even people like he and I, and this is what I said to him, like, you and I share the same values, we love each other, we trust each other. And if we can't figure out how to talk about that with that kind of foundation already set, then we cannot expect Congress to. So this has to be a kitchen table conversation that we are able, to move on. And so when we got to the point of actually producing a Braver Angels workshop in Pennsylvania, and it was the first one in person since COVID, I wanted my dad to participate. And that's in part because it's hard to find people who lean red to participate in these conversations sometimes, because there's a base level of distrust that goes on. I think what Ted shared about his wife being kind of fearful going in and hopeful coming out is exactly the kind of transformation that we saw on the evaluations, for the rest of the group. You know, people come in being really fearful. They don't think it's going to be productive. They think they're going to be attacked. And instead, it becomes this really hopeful, transformative experience, which I think speaks to the design as well as the intentions of the people who show up on it. And it looks like my dad is having technical difficulties, so I'll just keep on a couple more comments, and then Josh, if you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer them. I want to address this fear aspect because I think it's really important, and I've used this metaphor before. So for people who are visual thinkers, I'm a cat person, I'm an animal person generally, right? And if you see a scared cat, right? Imagine a scared cat. Cats will mess you up if they are feeling threatened, right? They have very sharp claws, they have teeth, and if a cat is scared and it's hissing at you and you approach it and you try to like handle it in any way, you are going to get attacked. And we don't think that the best thing to do in that circumstance is to like kick the cat or try to like injure the cat. But that is exactly what we try to do with people, right? We get into a conversation with someone who's coming from a place of fear and we're coming from a place of fear. And instead of making yourself calm and kind of getting on the cat's level and seeing maybe if you stay still and watch it and listen to it, that it might actually come to you. It might like, there he
Yeah.
is. It might actually, you might actually be able to be in relationship with that animal if you're not, if you, both of you can get out of that fear state, right? So I think that a lot of times, and I really want to, drive this point home by saying like, why would you treat a scared cat with more kindness and more empathy and than a human being that is in front of you, right? So we have to learn how to do this for one another, or our communities are going to fall apart. So Dad, I just explained kind of what happened with our relationship and your participation in the Red Blue workshop. Do you want to add anything as a starting block here?
Well, sorry, I slipped away there for a little bit. I had a technical difficulty. I had to change computers. Um, no, I just, it was a very interesting experience. I mean, I think that Heather felt the alienation that we had politically a little bit more deeply than I did, perhaps. But because as I told her, I said, you can't hate the little girl that fell asleep on your chest when she was 6 months old, grown into a beautiful young woman. So, we just didn't talk about some things that certain things, we just avoided those subjects in order to stay together and communicate as a family. But the workshop was really fairly profound. I mean, when it really helps you listen to what people are really thinking. And as Ted described the format, it was very good because you had to sit down and say, what does the other people think about you? What do the other people think about you? And about what your positions are and the stereotypes. And we got it pretty right. Both sides got it pretty right of what the other group felt about
Absolutely.
the others. And but what was so good about it is the format is that you're doing that self evaluation, but as you get into the group and listen carefully to how the other group analyze themselves, you start to understand what they were really thinking, what their real concerns were, and not what was on the surface. And I say 'cause so it was very good. I did walk away same thing, feeling much better about um, being able to hang out with people that don't think politically the same way I do, and to listen a little closer, okay, to why people feel the way they feel. And I'll give you one example. As we went through it, you know, we the red side thought that the blue side were a bunch of baby killers, and and they said the same thing. But when you listen very carefully to about the abortion issue, what you really discover is it's not about it's not about taking away babies' lives. It's about the choice, okay, and who gets to make the choice for whatever reason. So I mean, you have to learn past what's on the surface to find out what really the true motivation of people are, and it's one of the things that you walk away from. You walk away with just a deeper understanding of why the other people feel the way they do. So that's what I got from it, but it was good. And Heather and I, yes, we're maybe a little bit. I don't know that we're really that far apart right now, to be honest with you, politically. I think we're much closer than we thought we were as we got through the whole thing. When you start looking at what people are trying to do, and especially through efforts like this, it really helps you, I think, survive the situation. The interaction with people that just don't think like you very well at all, and it's takes away there should be no bitterness there. Okay, people feel the way they feel for very deep reasons, and um, you really need to understand what they are before, and it helps everybody get along a little bit better. So that's what I learned from, but it was quite a great experience.
And just to
Yeah.
add one more thing
Oh,
you to that too, that I think it's really important, and Braver Angels offers a separate module called Depolarizing Within that I would also really recommend to the entire group or anyone who's going through this, because um, it's a muscle building exercise to be able to listen and to be able to understand where your own biases are and how you might be coming off to other people. And we really have to be more self-aware about the ways in which we are actually becoming a stereotype in some ways, for certain things. And it's a really critical component part. So if you can't participate in a red and blue workshop, I would definitely recommend starting with that, because I believe you can do it online and on a self-paced way.
great. Um, Well, I think I'm gonna just take that little piece as it was, as an intro to what your experience was. And Jerry, I'm so glad we got you back on there. I was afraid I did something wrong, but we worked it out. So hopefully it'll stay that way. I'll ask you guys to turn your videos off for the moment, and I'm gonna invite Lee Rush and Brooke Rush to come on now. All right, there, there we go. All right. So that was great to hear their part, and I'm expecting well, I know that the event that you did, Lee, was a little bit different, but maybe you can just start out talking about how you got involved with Braver Angels
Right.
and specifically what kind of event you wanted to organize in your community and what you did.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us. I'll give a quick overview how I heard about Braver Angels. I had heard about them probably in the media somewhere over the last several years. I happened to be in Washington, D.C. last summer and attended a workshop that was not a Braver Angels sponsored workshop, but I happened to walk into the room and realize that the founder of Braver Angels, Bill Doherty, was our facilitator. So that was a really unique experience. Only 30 people in the room. He also has some roots here in the Philadelphia area, so we connected. And I talked a little bit more about getting involved when I came back home to Bucks County. And I learned a little bit about the different programs Braver Angels offers, and debates was one of them. So that's what really captured my interest about an event that we sponsored here in Percy in March. And as far as Brooke and I go, we come from a family that I think that our father instilled debate in our dialogue. I mean, he was always interested in the devil's advocate perspective, and he was, a quiet man in some ways, but he never shied away from, having robust discussion. So we grew up in a family that encouraged, I think we had a very loud family. Our dad was hard of hearing, so I think we kept competing for his attention. But he was the founder of our local Republican club in 1960, and he was a school board member in our school district when we were kids. And Brooke and I are both, I guess, semi-retired now, so we have a lot more time to talk with each other. And when I asked Brooke to think about coming to the debate, the debate really wasn't about politics. It was more about an issue with young people developing in our world around social media. And I was interested in a book I had picked up last year called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And the book is a bestseller. It's been on the New York Times list for well over 15 months. And being a former school teacher and involved in schools in the field of restorative justice, I had an opportunity to see so many classrooms where social media and cell phone use was, in my opinion, interrupting good teaching and learning. So the debate we had, sponsored by the Southeast Braver Angels Alliance, I also got the Bucks County League of Women Voters to co-sponsor it because both groups are nonpartisan, and they agreed to co-sponsor it. We had 70 people pre-registered. I don't think really it was about politics per se, party politics or ideology on party politics. It was really about what's good for children. And Brooke can speak to his perspective about why he came and his involvement in Braver Angels, and then we can talk a little bit more about some of our discussions because we do see some things differently politically.
Okay. Go ahead, Brooke.
All right. Well, my name's Brooke Rush, and I am Lee's younger brother. So that was my first experience with any type of real structured debate. I've done other stuff with TED and different things like that, but I was very interested mostly in the topic of cell phones, and I thought it was a great. So Lee always talks about, that we can agree to disagree or whatever, but it was just a good topic that I thought crossed over party lines. So it really interested me in terms of being able to something that we could try to put politics aside. Lee made a statement about the League of Women Voters being nonpartisan. I believe everything's partisan in life. I think we're all partisan, and that's okay. And to say that you're nonpartisan, I think everybody has a position and leans one way or the other. One of the interesting things, I had recently agreed to be the treasurer of our local GOP club. Nobody else really wanted to do it. That's what happens when you in a club like that. Nobody does it, so you step forward. And they said, "Sure, well, you can do it." So, and I said, "You know what? I thought this was a really interesting topic." So I asked our officers if I could present this to the club, that other people would be able to come to this debate about cell phone usage. And the officers, we talked about it, and they all said, "Yeah, this is great." And then I think it was Lee had a flyer or something, and there was just a little piece that the League of Women Voters was on the bottom or something, that it was sponsored by the League of Women Voters. And all of a sudden, it just all hell broke loose. I mean, just the club, the officers said, well, we can't be involved. The League of Women Voters they lean left, and this is not, and they try to pull back from it being a supported event or whatever. And it was just interesting to me. It was just such a visceral reaction. I just thought it was ridiculous. I don't care what a group they can be whatever they want. I mean, they can, but they were missing the point of the topic. It was about cell phones, not about that the league had helped Lee organize the event and had a structure to it. So it was a bit eye-opening for me to see that kind of reaction. So anyway, about the cell phone thing, I just thought it was great. And I invited my wife, Robin, and talked about it. I didn't think she would really want to go, but she said, "Yeah, I would go to that." And I said, "It's not about politics." And we talked about that. We mostly believe Lee's just trying to get me to believe the things he does. So it's really just, I have to stick around him. So I change my views. That's what's really what at hand. But it was, the event was really great in terms of, because it wasn't, you didn't really know what people were, which side they were on as far as political, in terms of just the way they felt about the cell phones. And they shared stuff, and Lee did a great job of keeping control of it so that it didn't lose control in terms of people talking to each other. They talked to the moderator, but I think it was just a control thing on Lee's part, that he liked to be in control and everybody had to talk to him. Um, and it was just great. So, but the only thing that came up politically at the end of the Braver Angels thing is, I think it was the red guy, and I love that red
David,
blue red. The
David,
red guy
yeah,
made an
David,
announcement
right.
that this was great, and we're all excited you all came, and we really are trying to do these things so that we're not so political. And the next event is Donald Trump's first 100 days disaster or success. And I'm there, holy crap! You couldn't have picked a more thing. I was just thought it was an interesting thing, and that was the only political thing that even came up. And I just thought it was to me, it was a shame because it went politics. It was just at the end of it. So but the structure of the cell phone thing was fantastic. And I would agree. Anybody should do more debates on that because it's a really interesting topic, if you ask me about. I feel bad for kids these days, the pressure they're under with cell phones, but so.
Just, I want to add one point because I know we're probably getting, this goes so fast. I thought, how are we going to fill up an hour, but it goes so fast. One
You're
quick,
fine, Lee. We're
all
fine.
right. One quick point, beyond, quote, Braver Angels and the league and the cell phones and the workshops, I I was struck years ago, and it was probably during the pandemic when the election of 2020 came about. I've had signs in my yard for both Republican, Democrats, and independents. And it was the first time in my life I was sitting on my front porch and a vehicle went by my home. I live close to the road. The person driving the car stopped and he yelled out, he goes, "You're an effing communist." And I think I had my
It
flag.
wasn't me, by the way.
Okay,
I
I
just want to
didn't
make
think.
sure it was not me.
Yeah, but somebody yelled to me in my home of where I've lived 45 years. Brooke and I, by the way, are 10th generation Bucks Countyans. We have lived in this community. Our family has been here for 2 centuries plus. Our father, was a good uh, Mennonite stock, and that's another story. But we are well known in our community in some ways, and I just was struck that someone felt moved to call me an effing communist because I had a sign in my yard that didn't agree with. And then as the politics unwound in the school, the culture wars, I got Brooke involved a little bit in our local school politics, in that we, as a group of citizens, six Republicans, I was sorry, three Republicans, three Democrats, six of us petitioned our local court to change how our school board was elected. I don't want to get in the weeds regarding representation, but Brooke and I agreed that there could be a better way to elect school board members. So that's how Brooke and I got involved, I think, in some local stuff. But I was convinced, even some of my Democratic friends or Democrat friends, and both Republican, I would hear these people call, you know, someone who was a Republican a name like, fascist and, communist. And I'm thinking, this is absolutely insane. I mean, you don't know my brother just because he's a Republican. You don't know him. And you don't know me just because I have this kind of, registration. So I'm convinced that the Braver Angels way, to call it the Braver Angels way, which we have a motto, is what I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to. Because, I just think this is really dangerous that we are hating each other so violently, both verbally and even sometimes physically. That's just my last point. I don't know if Brooke wants to add to that about politics.
Well, I do, and I want to share this cautiously. I have a family member that after the most recent election sent out a letter. I'm sure with thought. I mean, they waited a while to do it and sent it to what they perceived as um, the members of the family that may have voted for President Trump. I don't believe anybody was in the voting booth with me, so I'm not really sure they know how I voted, but there's a perception there. And they have taken the path of uh, writing this letter saying they want nothing to do with any of these members of the family forever, and that we're evil people. And it was very hurtful for my wife. It's a member of her family, and I can't imagine somebody actually doing that. And I don't understand it. We have weddings coming up that are been coming up this year. So I've determined to reach out personally again and try to make a connection. I think my hand will be slapped back. We've tried a couple other things, but it blows my mind that anybody would take it to this level. That something that happens in Washington is that would ruin your family, and how you can make this conscious choice to do this to members of the family. Lee and I would disagree. I love talking to him about stuff. I think he's wrong on many issues, but we agree to just not like I'm committed to never that we would ever argue about something. It'd be stupid. It's so you have to go in with that commitment that no matter what, we're still brothers and we're never gonna, you know, allow that to separate us. So it's a shame sometimes in some of this. And this family member is not the only one. I've heard this. I've seen articles about it that people have cut off their family, and I mean Heather talked about it. You know, they were thinking of not being together. That's horrible. So
All right. Well, it's a serious thing. It's really happening. And I appreciate your story of how Lee you put together a different kind of event, but also that, it brings people from across the community. So at this point, I'm just going to pause for 1 second, speak to the audience that we are going to go into panel mode. I'm going to invite Heather and Jerry back on screen. And if you have questions for the panel, you may use the Q&A. If you aren't sure how to use that, type it in the chat. I will find it there, find your comment, and hopefully bring it into the discussion. But first off, I guess I'll just say to the panel, is there anything that comes up for you immediately from what you've heard the others saying and that you'd maybe like to respond to?
Well, it's good to know we're not the only family that is, going through this or that went through this. I think there's a lot of people out there who are. And I do want to make one comment, because, our family, like Brooke and Lee's family, has been here in Pennsylvania for a long time, and I feel like sometimes I identify more as a Pennsylvanian than as an American. Like I'm a Pennsylvanian first and an American second. And I feel like the local angle is really important. Like you have to be able to talk with the people that you live beside. And there are a lot of people who live in America right now who have come over the course of the last couple hundred years, who come from different backgrounds and come from different cultures and have, different ideas about what's important. And that is what a pluralistic society is. And I think the cautionary tale about that is also to make sure that we're not seeing people as like groups or stereotypes, but that even the people within those groups are individuals who think differently potentially from the people that are aside them, but we need to give each other space to be able to have those conversations and to listen.
yeah, and if I could say too that well, I have a brother and a sister who no longer really see each other because they're on completely different, I mean, completely different sides of the political spectrum, way out on the edge. They really don't see each other at all anymore. And what's really what's important about what we're doing, trying to do here is that the ability to conduct dialogue and debate is so important to a representative democracy like ours. It's how you actually, change things for the better as you move along. And so you have to be able to do that, and learning how to listen and listen really carefully to the idea and what it is what helps us debate new ways to do things and how to change our government as we move forward. And that's what we do. We change it incrementally. And if we try something that doesn't work, and I mentioned this in the workshop, let's say, okay, let's open the border and see what happens. Okay, well, we really, all these people need a place to go, and then you take a look at what happened, and what the consequences were, and you say, well, maybe we shouldn't have done it quite that way. Maybe, we have to back off of that a little bit, and we make our changes and go forward. But that debate is what's important about how the country proceeds and how we go. So we have to be able to have that meaningful debate, and we can't cut it off and stop talking, or we stymie ourselves as a country and as a family or whatever else. It's just not worth it. And you certainly don't want to get to the point where you can't be in the same room as somebody else. That's just, I don't know. That's just not right. Not helpful or healthy at all. So you have to have that. You have to have that dialogue, and these are the forums that we are putting together to do that, and it's helpful, very helpful.
Ted?
Yeah, and I really very much agree with what you're saying, Jerry. And I think that Braver Angels, for me, coming upon it, already having an interest in, first of all, restorative practices and then citizens' assemblies, which bring together people around, the same kinds of issues that Braver Angels might, but using a format that they're supposed to make decisions, recommendations anyway, but decisions And that might be a useful way to make a lot of policy in our current society, because clearly the kinds of experiences we're all seeing in legislatures are, they're not conversations. They're people fighting with each other and jockeying for position based on wedge issues. They're not really talking about what would be best. They're talking about what would be best for them in the next election. And that becomes the prevailing criteria for decisions. So I don't think anybody actually would much argue with that in any political position, but I see Braver Angels as giving people the confidence to know that we can come together, because people hear about these things, they go, "Oh my God!" I remember one friend, well, if my neighbor, if she were in it, oh my God. Of course, we didn't ask her how she felt about him being in it, but the fact is that it would be a different perspective of many in a room where people actually have reliably proved to be very civil to each other, as they do in Braver Angels events. And I don't know, it's very encouraging to me. And I think Braver Angels is like a strand of social innovation, as is restorative practices, as is this deliberative democracy stuff. And these three strands of social innovation, I think, can support each other in many ways to actually demonstrating how people, you can do things with people, not always to them or for them, that we actually are capable of representing ourselves in the right settings. Yeah, I'm excited about it. I
I
don't know.
saw,
I'm gonna,
I
oh, go
saw,
ahead, Lee.
I just saw there's some questions coming up, so I want a quick answer. Try to answer one of them, and
Yep.
then we'll take some questions, I guess. Uh, Years ago, I heard a great interview. George Harrison's wife, after he passed, was interviewed, and someone asked her, they had a long marriage, and somebody said, like, "What's the secret to a long marriage?" And she thought for a second, and she goes, "Never get divorced." Okay, so when people say, "Well, how do you keep your family together?" My answer is like, keep talking to each other. I think what Brooke said, when people stop talking, then all bets are off. And Brooke and I do talk about politics. I enjoy it. I do not try to change Brooke's opinion. I really try not to. My approach is to try to be really curious about how he might square some of his thinking along with his values, because I grew up with Brooke. I know his values to some degree, and we share values about trust and communication and love and cooperation. And so I try to get curious about, like, tell me more, you know, we agree on some things, and it's hard to have some of these discussions because it can get emotional. But for me personally, it's like just I like talking about my two favorite subjects are talking about religion and politics. So I try to find people that want to do that. And then that's all I have to say. I think we'll have a bunch of questions here.
Can I add one more thing to that too? I think because there's questions about like how do you build empathy and teach empathy. Humans are naturally empathetic. You don't actually have to teach that. We actually like we are deeply attuned to the people who are around us. I think what has eroded is cultural norms. We have made it okay in our culture right now to attack other people, to attack their character, to attack what values we perceive they have or don't have, and we get encouraged for that and we get rewarded for that, especially if we're online and it's a lot of point scoring, it's a lot of making sure that the out group is getting beat up on. And what I have tried to do is model for other people, as a leader of my organization, of the magazine, of the groups that I volunteer with. I'm also on the board of Fair for All, and do work with the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression as well. Like, I think that we have to build a coalition of people who are willing to model that it's not okay to do that. I'll give you a quick example of something that happened to me the other day in regard to Pennsylvania. I was with a bunch of very lefty progressive people at a party, and someone made a Pennsylvania comment, right? And I could have said, "You're a jerk. I'm from Pennsylvania. You've never been to, the place where my family is from, yada, yada, yada." And instead, what I said was, I hear what you're saying, and I get why. You know, it's that kernel of truth thing that the Braver Angels thing picks up on. I get why you're saying that, but here's the thing: I'm from here, and my family is from here, and it's kind of deeply hurtful to hear you talk about it like that. And I would just encourage you, you know, to think a little bit more about the kinds of things that you say. And she was immediately mortified, like immediately mortified. And I was like, and we can talk the rest of the night. Like, we can have a drink, we can sit down and get a glass of wine. Like, I'm not going to be upset with you. I want to hear more about who you are and, like, you know, whatever it is. But all of these tiny little moments that we have with people can be moments where we change the dynamic of what is acceptable. And I think a lot of that is doing it by modeling the behavior.
Great. So I'm going to start with one question. They're sort of interrelated questions, although I see some more popped up. But from the chat, and this is, I guess, for the people working with Braver Angels, you two, you know, running these events, but how do you create a safe environment for dialogue? Are there skills, are there techniques that you use with that, or you're trained to use within that format that creates the space?
There is a facilitator training, isn't there? Lee, you
Yeah.
went to.
The one thing that attracted me to the debate format, as Brooke said, there's a very tight structure. So if someone wants to speak from the floor, we are trained as facilitators to use a parliamentarian procedure to say, please address the chair. If you have a question for the previous speaker, instead of you asking that speaker directly, please address your question. And it's so interesting because Brooke, if you watch the videotape of our debate, somewhere I have a videotape, Brooke wanted to keep interacting with our other brother, Jay, who was a speaker, and I kept interrupting Brooke and saying, please direct your question to me. I am the chair. And we were laughing about it. People got a big kick out of it. There were three of us in the room as brothers. But I think the answer to Ted's question is there's a strict protocol. And I didn't do a red blue workshop yet, but what I learned from Bill Doherty is, and he is a designer of some of this stuff because he's a former, no, I think he's still a therapist, that there has to be some ground rules and norms about how to speak to each other. Because if it's just a free flowing, this is not like a debate, like a political debate. There's a very tight structure to it, and I think people come wanting to have a different experience instead of what you see on the television with shouting and town hall meetings with people being drug out by the police. That's just all, it's just all noise. I mean, we're really serious. I think Brave Angels are serious about finding a better way.
Yeah.
Brooke, what was your experience of Lee asking you to stick to the format?
It's hard to do that because you want to talk to the speaker, and I kidded him about it that it was a power issue, but it wasn't. It was the way that it would have devolved into people hollering at each other. The one thing I wanted to just address that Heather, and I've heard people say this, that it's so horrible now, and we're in such difficult times that people are mean to each other. Robin, my wife, and I are just watching the movie Lincoln again. And I've always said it's really no different now than it was. I mean, they were horrible. I mean, they were just brutal to each other and physically altercations and would hit each other with a cane or whatever. So the point now is that everything is videotaped and everything is available and everything and people now do it to get the likes to show that they
Right.
attack somebody. That's the only difference. I don't think we're that horrible people now that we hate each other, and there was strong disagreement. I would have loved to have been around when they formed the Constitution. I think they might have had a few arguments and some screaming at each other but they came together and formed this wonderful country. So
And they all ran out and bought newspapers.
there you go.
No kidding.
So it's just different, and just the social media and that
Well,
the fact that everything's taped is just
and it's
is really a
amplified
difficult part of it. That's the difference. That's
we have the big amplifiers out there on social media
yeah.
that just take whatever it is and just blow it out as far as to each side as they can.
Well,
It's
and
because
and Lee calls it the echo chamber, that you surround, and this is what we got into with the cell phone thing. And Jay was very much my other brother. it feeds a loop back to you. It's done maliciously. It's not by accident. Don't think this is just happens that you happen to talk about something and Facebook then shares stuff that you just talked about. It's listening the entire time. It feeds you a loop so that you stay online and become more engaged. It's with malice and forethought. It is well thought out to keep, and that's why Jay believes we're bifurcation. We have now become separated more because we're in our own loops that pull us apart from each other. How is it possible that we're exactly 50-50? When you think about that, the elections are that close. That's really, what would be the chances that the country is that divided, pretty close to being even? It's not by chance, it's done by thought.
Well, so
Heather.
I I think there's a biological reason for this, honestly. Like when a population is decimated after a war and we lose a lot of particularly men, it takes a while, but we get back to 50-50. Like nature wants that balance. And like if you read Jonathan Haidt's other book on the morality essentially, and how we develop our morality and come to be in different political tribes, he talks about our natural inclination to be more conservative or to be more open, right? And you have to imagine that from an evolutionary standpoint, there needed to be people within your tribe who are like, hey, those folks over there look kind of like us. Like maybe they have more food. We should go talk to them. And you've got to have the person in the group that says, that is a bad idea. They need to stay over here. We need to stay over here. There could be a danger here. And so conservatism and progressivism are this yin yang, right? We talk about it as a pendulum that swings back and forth, but I think that's a better metaphor for it because you need both. You can't just have all one on one side and one on the other. And to think about how does this work in a family where you don't have a moderator, or what happens if you're disagreeing about facts, which is something that's also in the chat. I would recommend that you can still choose to do the same thing. You have to choose to come to the conversation, and the other person has to choose to come to the conversation to understand rather than to convince, and to make sure that you conduct yourself in a way that you could have the next conversation. To just agree to those two things, that the outcome that you want, most of all out of anything, is to have the next conversation and to not cut each other off.
So there's a couple sort of questions that are clustered. What do you do when somebody's hot, when somebody's you know difficult to handle, as a facilitator? Do you have any suggestions for that?
I think you have to
Yes.
acknowledge their emotion, right?
Sorry, say that again.
You have to acknowledge their emotions, to say like, this is like, I can see that you're really upset about this. This is something that was really important to you. I think there's other people here for whom it's also really important. But let's try to take a breath and, think about how we want to conduct ourselves. But if you try to shut them down, or if you yell at them, I go back to my scared cat analogy, like they're just going to run away, or they're going to get more angry.
Right. Lee, do you have any thoughts on that? I don't know if that came up so much during your debate.
Tell me the question again. I was reading some of the
Oh
chat.
yeah.
Go ahead.
If somebody's hot, if somebody's, not fitting into the the way that it's gonna work, stirring it up.
What to do about it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Just recognize it.
Yeah.
I think emotions, I think the problem is when people try to truly convince the other person that they're wrong,
Mm,
that I'm right and you're wrong. Um, that takes quite a bit of ego hubris that, to think that you have it figured out and that the person you're operating or debating has it wrong. Um, one of my teachers, Peter Block, always says, like, do you want to work something out, or do you want to be right? Or do you want to win? Do you want to win, or do you want to work something out? If you want to win, go hire a lawyer, get out of the room and go to court. It's not about win lose. It's about truly understanding. I think the real question is, how can someone that I love dearly, my brother Brooke in this case, think so differently about certain issues? Well, I want to get curious, and sometimes we can find each other. I don't know if Brooke is as curious about me and my thinking, if they ask him, but I think that is the key: being curious and really seeking to understand the other person uh, first before you're trying to convince them that you're right.
There's another book I want to recommend by Julia Galef called Scout Mindset that speaks to this as well. She encourages people to get out of what she calls soldier mindset, because if you're in soldier mindset, all you're doing is trying to destroy the opposition. That's your
Yeah,
job as a soldier, right? But there are other jobs in the military, and scout is one of them. And the scout's job is to just understand the lay of the land. What
that's
is
good.
out there? What is true? And she gives a lot of hacks around how to get past intractable thinking, one of which is to ask people, is there a piece of information that I could give to you that would help, that would change your mind? Because if there isn't a piece of information that would change your mind, citing facts at them is not gonna, it's not gonna help. There's something else that's going on there. For your own self, the degree of certainty that you have with something is something that it's helpful to think about. I'm 90% certain that my, immigration thoughts are the right way to go for the country, because if you acknowledge to yourself that there's 10% of you that says, I would be open to an argument counter to that, that can help. And what it also does is separate you from the idea that you have that your policy position is not you, it's a position that you hold. And so I think often we're also thinking about that person as the policy they agree with, rather than them as a human being.
That's good. That's really good. What's the name of that book?
It's called Scout Mindset.
Scout. I like
Yeah.
it.
And to the person who was asking about how do you do this in families rather than in a place where you have a kind of set of rules that people have agreed to do, um, I go back to the fear and the scared cat. So we had formal conversations at Founders Weekend, and we also had informal conversations. And I found myself with 5 women that all of whom I love very deeply, in my home post, one of the events. 2 of whom are gay, one of whom voted for Trump, and one of whom voted for Harris. Another person who, was a lifelong Democrat and liberal who voted for Trump this time around, and 2 of us who voted for Harris. And things were getting heated. Like people were starting to, that's not true, or it was just. And because it was my house. I mean, I am a moderator. I was like, guys, guys, guys. I need you all to stop for a second, and we're going to go around the room, and I want each of you to tell me what you're afraid of in this situation. And it was a way to humanize everyone there and to get to a deeper level about what they were actually worried about. We were trying to talk up here, but the emotions were the thing that were actually talking, and we had to acknowledge that and move to that deeper level before we could go back to the politics.
All right, we only have a few minutes, and then I am inviting everyone who can join us to a 30-minute post-webinar discussion group, and I've put another link in the chat, but don't click it until we're done here. But someone asked in the chat, would the panelists say the conversations between family members of different political beliefs on pressing political problems outside of that structured dialogue, is that still possible? Or is this more about maintaining family ties despite the ability to talk about those issues?
Yeah. I guess it depends how important the relationship is, and if it's a close relationship like ours, I mean, you either you'll do one or the other. Okay, you'll either stop talking about it, okay, because you can't get to that what really is bothering you thing that Heather was just talking about, um, or you'll listen a little closer, okay, and you'll say, well, what are you scared of, okay, uh, and why is it so important to you to think that, and why do you think that way? And so you have that discussion instead of walking away or not, or just ignoring. It just depends what you're what you're ready to do at that point in time, and how important the relationship is. There are times when we maybe just had to walk away and not talk about it. Okay, maybe it's and just do something else and whatever else. And I know that happens, but if the relationship is important, then you should be able to use the techniques that Nate we're just talking about here to really fundamentally understand what the real issue is that is making scaring people. I mean, that's really what it is. People when people act that strongly, they're scared that something awful is going to happen. Right? If this happens, or if your guy wins, or your guy does something that I don't want to do. So it's one or the other, but and the relationship, how important the relationship is, helps you make the decision, I think. So.
Great. Thank you for that.
I was just going to add to that, Josh. I mean,
Yeah,
choose your battles. For
yeah.
goodness sakes, I mean, we're all in relationships, whether it's marriages or brothers or any children. I mean, I have one child very conservative and two very liberal, and I love them all. I don't, but I choose what we just talk about. I mean, I love talking to them and stuff, but I'm not gonna allow it to go off the rails. And when it is, I just say, all right, stop, we're done. You know, I mean, we didn't get into my relationship with my children yet, so they're each independent thinkers, which is good. I'm proud of them for that.
Yeah,
So,
you found that out about one of my daughters as well. So
All right, you all, we are at 1 o'clock. I want to thank you so much. You're welcome to stay, but I know some of you can't. So I just want to thank you for being our guests today, Heather, Jerry, Brooke, and Lee, and all you folks for joining us.